That summer, I hunted the serial killer at night from my daughter's playroom. For the most part, I mimicked the bedroom routine of a normal person. Those are the first two sentences of a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is the story written by the late Michelle Mcnamara, a woman whose sole purpose was to try to find the identity and eventually incarcerate the Golden State Killer. Unfortunately, she never got the chance to. Much like many true crime fans, myself included, we have a habit of investing ourselves into specific cases, trying to help by inserting ourselves into the narrative of the cases. While on paper this seems harmless, and in some cases, yes, it can help, it's also a very tricky line in which many of us need to know not to cross, which raises the question, what is the problem with citizen detectives? In the beginning, each of us, as far as horror fans or true crime aficionados or just people involved in fiction in general, all have a morbid curiosity when it comes to subject of death. It's an inevitability that we unfortunately all have to face one way or another, be it a loved one or be it someone we know. But some of us, we invest ourselves more so if there's unanswered questions. There's things that we feel need a resolution mentally for us or for those involved. And by trying to find a resolution, it lingers and lingers, creating this sort of need and want to figure out where and what pieces of this morbid puzzle could be. Maybe we can get within the mind of the killer. In dealing with the true crime community or in dealing with cases like this, there are two things that one needs to not stumble into. The first is one we've talked about before, Pareidolia, the act of seeing patterns that aren't really there. It's kind of similar to seeing something out of the corner of your eye that you think is something, but it turns out is something else. Much like thinking of a coat on a chair in the dark could be a person. The same can happen with true crime. You start seeing this thing that maybe you overlooked, maybe another detective overlooked, or maybe things that should be there that you may not quite see just yet, and you try desperately to see what others may not. The other pit trap is apophenia, or the act of seeing connections that are not there between random things. Probably one of the most high-profile versions of this is the Elisa Lam case. For those of you that may not be familiar with the case, Elisa Lam was a young woman staying at the Cecil Hotel who suffered from bipolar disorder as well as a form of schizophrenia. Her case raised so much attention because of her weird, almost trance-like final video in which she did weird hand gestures and movements, eventually being found within a water cooler in the hotel 19 days later. Now, the reason this case raised so many red flags was so many online sleuths were trying to find the connection, try to solve the puzzle, try to see who killed Elisa Lam, who actually did what they did to her, finding weird connections, blaming everyone, everything involved. Even someone that was just a random singer who happened to stay there a year prior, or finding a connection of her name sounding similar to a tuberculosis test that she happened to be in a college that studied tuberculosis. Patterns like that just ended up creating more problem, creating a spiral of coincidence that ultimately led nowhere. The real reason that citizen detectives try to solve the cases is the same reason all of us played puzzles at some point in our lives. It's that euphoric release of endorphins we get from solving it. It's the high of being able to be the one to solve the puzzle. You want to try to resolve an issue that you either may not be able to solve, others may not be able to solve, or you may not even have all the pieces. But being able to say that you did it is something that can take a hold of your life. Much like Michelle Mcnamara herself ended up working herself so much trying to resolve this case, she lost sleep, overcaffeinated herself, took multiple drugs to stay awake, and eventually her heart gave out. But in her death, all of her notes and everything that she had studied, the interviews, and everything that she accomplished, eventually did catch the Golden State Killer. Through her obsession, she was able to finally do what she always wanted to. But much like any drug user, the high is never worth it. The difference with solving a puzzle vicariously, solving a mystery from adding something to a case that you may actually know, seeing someone you know, or knowing information and helping an investigation is one thing. But inserting yourself as if you are a detective when you're not, unfortunately has real life consequences. Because these are real people. They're real victims. Real people that have lost loved ones. A burden that, even if you are able to solve, will never 100% make that person feel whole again. The best that you can do is give them some semblance of closure. But by doing so, would you also get closure? Or would it just be another thing to finish and another thing to start over? So, what is the problem with citizen detectives? I believe it's the inability to separate yourself. You get so invested in cases that you try to see the thought patterns of the actual detectives, the actual police works. You start losing yourself in cases. You start investing so much into it that you can harm yourself and your loved ones by trying to save others. Much like a firefighter jumping into a burning building, they will tell you that no one firefighter will just go into a fire on their first day. They would have to have training. They'd have to know the proper precautions, procedures. They'd have to have actual equipment. There's precautionary measures to prevent themselves from going into a flame. But with citizen detectives, there is no precaution. There is no protection other than a screen that you sit behind. There's nothing differentiating you from jumping into a line of fire. And because you're doing that, you could also be hurting someone else in the process. But if you do decide to do it, you should be very cautious. Some things you can't unsee, and some things you can't unknow. But in the end, these aren't answers. They are hypotheticals.
I saved Johan's life. That's what put this all in motion. So many people have died since that night. So many precious lives. I've seen enough bloodshed. I won't let more innocent people die!